July 17th, 2020 meeting of the Municipality of Anchorage Board of Relation Examiners and Appeals, also known as the Building Board. Tanya, would you be so kind as to do a roll call?
Certainly. Mr. Steele?
Here.
Mr. Straight?
Present.
Mr. Fradine?
Present.
Mr. Cowling?
Present.
Mr. Boney?
Here.
Mr. McCann?
He was here.
Okay, we'll try back. Mr. Sobolewski?
Present.
Mr. Feller?
Here.
Mr. Field?
Here.
And Tyler said he would call in when his plane landed. Okay, that's, you have a quorum, Mr. Chair, and now I'm going to call for staff.
Tana, I was present if you didn't hear that.
Okay, did not hear it, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Dole?
Present.
Mr. Heil?
Present.
Mr. Knopfinger?
Present.
Mr. Bolin?
Present.
Ms. Hellman? Okay. Mr. Bergstrom? And Bart Meinhardt.
Here.
Okay, staff is present.
Do we have any other folks on the line, one way or another, public or otherwise?
We have not heard anyone call in or asked to be added to the Teams meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have a quorum. We will move forward. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting?
I move to approve the agenda as published.
Second. Moved and second. Any discussion on the agenda? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Okay, who was the gentleman that seconded the agenda?
That was Troy Feller.
Thank you.
All right, hearing none opposed, we have an approved agenda. Next item is approval of the minutes. Tanya, thank you for setting out those minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from our June 18th meeting?
Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Steele, and I move for approval of the minutes.
I second. This is Royal.
Okay.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approval of the minutes, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Our minutes are approved. All right, which brings us to item 4, our new business, which is local amendment to the 2018 building code, the main reason we're here today. Could I get staff to give a rundown of what happened at our previous meeting and where we're at moving forward?
So, what was it, Monday of this week? It was Monday of this week, wow. Some people sent in some comments on International Building Code and the fire code. Most of them were typos or misspellings, or what were perceived to be typos or misspellings. A lot of just about everything they thought was misspelled, it was spelled in a strange way in our local amendments because it was actually spelled that way in the code book. So about half the comments we picked up or made minor corrections to some punctuation and whatnot. Scott Boney had a couple of amendments concerning re-roofs that we clarified, and I'll let Scott speak to that. The GAC slightly amended a local amendment to the IRC that didn't really structurally change it that much, I think, in my opinion, but it clarified it. And it has to do when a geotechnical evaluation is required and seismically induced ground failure zones 4 and 5 within the MOA here. And there was a couple of corrections that we made to the fire code, a couple of typos there. But other than that, I think the document's in really good shape.
Thank you, Mr. Bodenicus. Can I get you to speak to your comments? And before that, we're getting some feedback here on the line. If you're not talking, would you mind hitting mute and make sure we're not feeding back through each other's speakers here? Mr. Bodie, do you want to speak to your comments?
Yeah, thank you. Essentially, there were two comments that came from committee that were missed inadvertently, and I worked with Ross to get those in. Essentially, the two of them are the same. It's the IBC and the IEDC. The IBC and IEDC relaxed some of the requirements on a roof replacement, that you didn't have to meet the drainage slopes and you didn't have to meet the overflow drain requirements. We said that's okay if you're doing a recover where you're just basically doing an overlay of the existing roof, but if you're going to tear off the existing membrane, then you have to put in the enhanced drainage, or you got to meet the drainage requirements of the IBC at 1/4 inch per foot, and you have to meet the overflow drain requirements. And we also put in an amendment that if there is conditions on an existing building where you can't meet those head wall conditions due to openings or wall types or something like that, wall type flashings or some extenuating circumstance, then it relaxed the drainage requirements a little bit, so we didn't have to redo windows because we're redoing a roof necessarily. That you could get a little bit less than the code required 1/4 and 12, but you still have to provide positive drainage. And that was all coming through committee. It just didn't get into the amendments. I worked with Ross. We got those back in as the committee had written them and or intended it. So we're good.
Okay. Ross, did you hear from the other committees, and do you feel we're in a good place as far as each committee is reviewed and approved?
No.
For the proposed wording?
So I did not hear from everybody. Just IBC structural, IBC non-structural, IEBC structural, non-structural, the IFC fire code, but I didn't really hear anything from UPC, IMC, IFGC, and that stuff. And I'm confident that the local amendments are in good shape.
This is Craig. I sent out literally last minute 2 items on the UPC. And I just talked to Yars before this meeting to verify that we were on the same page on those.
Eric, you're the one that's giving us the feedback.
Oh, sorry.
I couldn't hear Eric. Can you not Eric, Craig, could you repeat that, please?
Okay, so this is Craig. On the UPC side, I literally sent out 5 minutes before this meeting an email with 2 minor differences that were noted at the last second. And I called Yars prior to this meeting and talked to him about them to verify that he was in concurrence with those 2 changes. One of them is just a very minor numbering error. They forgot a 4 in the sequence there. But the other one was adding at the end of a 110 degree water temperature, saying there was an exception at the end of it, that the committee added that except for engineered systems at the end of that paragraph. That was in our committee meeting minutes, that was added at the last second to this.
So those are not in our draft that we received here from Tampa then?
That is correct. Those are not included in the version you have in front of you. I emailed out just before the meeting the underlined revisions in verbiage.
And Craig, you said that was for the UBC, is that correct?
Plumbing code, uniform plumbing code, yes.
Plumbing code.
I apologize for the exceptionally last second changes.
Hello, Chair, this is Keith.
I will note on the plumbing code, 2 other plumbing code members reviewed and went through the amendments and didn't see any other issues.
Mr. Sokolowski, you have a comment?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I also am guilty of a couple of last minute comments. Actually, riding in the coattails of Eric's proposed modifications from, I believe, yesterday or the day before, he and I had some conversation about that, because it's actually something that he's proposing to the IMC, which also had implications for the IFGC. But I think he did a good job of getting his intention out there, or at least his proposal out there. But in reviewing that, I also noticed that, because the follow-up that I made to it today was basically to bring the proposed modifications that he's making to, or he's proposing to the IMC, also to the IFGC, because the section he's citing has an exact mirror copy in the IFGC as well. And it was just an attempt to make sure that if we were going to make modifications to the IMC, that we made the same modifications to the IFGC, since they read the same. I also found that there was a change, or there was a note in the amendment for the IFGC that was not in the IMC. And it was, again, I mentioned it in the email I sent out today, but it was meant as a means of making sure that both of those amendments read the same, since the sections that they're referencing in their respective codes also read the same.
And is that regarding the requirements for classified areas? Am I recalling correctly which section we're talking about?
It was the one regarding, go ahead, Eric.
Elevation of ignition sources. It's 23.20.304.3.
And the matching section referencing the IFG is 23.110-305.3.
If we're going to talk about that, do you want me to give any update on what transpired since our last meeting to now on it?
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Kelly.
I wrote up a summary, sent it out to the interested parties, Victor, and I believe the mechanical lead. It didn't go, we were going to just eliminate the amendment. That didn't go over very well. So they suggested that I take a step back from it and come up with language to just limit its influence. So that's what this attempt in the yellow highlighted text in the email that I sent out today to cover, limiting the influence of that amendment, basically limiting it to 5,000 square foot spaces that you can put a vehicle in, and also limiting that it doesn't extend out past that area that the vehicle could be in, because that's another big part of the amendment, is there's no limitation at all. Once you state it just by occupancy, there's no way to stop that boundary at all. It's going to go into every room if that particular inspector sees it that way. So it leaves a really gray area. And there's no way to amend the NEC to address this, because this in no way is a requirement of the NEC, and there's no way to amend this without changing this language in this amendment. That's it.
Thank you. Any other comments from the group about review comments, modifications, or acceptance? Mr. Dole.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Gary Heil, that Gary Heil be recognized to speak on behalf of staff concerning these two amendments and some further discussion we've had.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Heil.
Yeah, hi, Gary Heil through the chair. In regards to the amendment that Eric's discussing, I had opportunity to speak to both Victor, lead electrical, and Yars, lead plumbing mechanical this morning. We're all on board and think that that's a reasonable solution to the problem. We would ask to entertain a friendly amendment to the amendment, and that would be to be more specific about the type of door, to be consistent with other similar code requirements. For example, the door between a occupied residential space and a garage, which stays, tightly gasketed self-closing door. So they don't put up some bar doors or something like that.
I think that's reasonable, yeah.
Thank you, that's all I had.
Thank you.
So would that be like a smoke rated door?
Well, I mean,
Fire,
we did,
then you got
typically I think, it's usually a 20-minute door, but whether you wanted to be that specific or not, just wanted to make sure that it was tightly gasketed, and self-closing as a minimum. We did entertain the thought of maybe, adding the verbiage, 20-minute door, which is the standard.
a 20-minute door is a higher standard than a smoke rated door, so that's.
No, I understand, but that's a typical door separation between, for example, in a residence between the garage and the living space. I mean, there may be some applications where because of it may be required to be a 1-hour door potentially, but that would be called out on the plans anyway. So,
sure.
But as a minimum, though.
Through the
Just
chair.
so we get the right kind of verbiage in there, is the type of door where I'm coming from.
Yeah, through the chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
So like a 20-minute door is not required to have any seal on the bottom of it. For NFPA, you can have up to like a 3/4 inch gap on it. I think we're really going to head down a rabbit's hole here if we really start getting into what type of door is adequate. I think the language is good as is. A door's a door.
Well, I disagree as an inspector looking at many of those, but if you had the same language in a house, what would they put in there? They wouldn't put in a gasket self-closing door. They'd put in just a door because there was a door.
I guess my point is I think we're solving a problem that really doesn't exist. I mean,
if it didn't exist, we wouldn't have this in the code in the first place, Ross, for 20-some years.
well, in my opinion, this doesn't need to be in the code, period. But if we're going to keep it in the code, then
Well, somewhere along the line, the committee members thought it needed to be in the code.
This is Eric. I have a thought on the door. I think that what Ross is saying is probably the way to proceed, because if you look at the rest of the language in the initial or the original portion of the code that we're amending, it does not address adjacent areas or require, have any specific requirements about the doors in that portion of the language. So I don't really see the need to possibly address the door in this particular case, which is an added above the requirement of the original language.
Well, I think the reason is because we weren't separating spaces, but now we are. It included kind of the whole space, we had read before.
Well, yeah, it did include the whole space, but if you think about it, if there's a parking garage, which that's what one of the versions of the original code addresses, if there's an office off of the parking garage, it doesn't have any impact on that office area, and it doesn't address the door or how exactly it's separated, because it's a separate area. There's, separate space.
Mr. Knopfsinger, I believe you got cut off. Did you have more? Was there more to your comment you were saying?
Yeah, so this whole amendment that we created that says group F, M, and S occupancies with overhead doors providing access to vehicles and equipment containing combustible fuels shall comply with this section. That was all created by a local amendment. To my knowledge, there was that amendment was created out of somebody's good idea. That I'm not aware that there's ever been any sort of fuel spillage or fire resulting that created this amendment. It was created because every once in a while our inspectors would observe a contractor parking a vehicle or a couple of vehicles inside of his shop at the end of the day to keep it warm overnight. In order for a fire to happen resulting from that, obviously several things would all have to go wrong simultaneously. He would have to fill his tanks so far to the brim that fuel would actually expand and spill out the tank. You'd have to have the perfect fuel-air mixture then flow past an ignition source at the right time to be ignited. To me, the risk of this happening is so extremely low. It's like we're solving a problem that doesn't exist. And parking, and this isn't something unique to Alaska. I mean, I'm sure there's a minor amount of this type of parking going on throughout the country, and the national code hasn't gone here.
As Gary Howell, the chair, if I may.
Go ahead, Gary.
I just a little history. I was on the committee when that was developed, back in the 90s. And it was determined at the time that it was thought by the committee, and I don't know if Craig was on the committee then or not, he may have been, that it was climatic in nature, just because of the likelihood for people to park vehicles overnight in a building in the middle of winter, as opposed to leaving them outside where you don't have those same problems. So it was climatic in nature, and it was based on the potential that there could be a spill, and that's true. To say that it could never happen and it would never expand, I'd like to give a brief example of a building board meeting we had on a hangar where there was a heater in the office just off of the hangar door, and they said that would never happen, the door would never be left open, and we'd never have a fuel spill. Well, it wasn't a couple days later, we have a picture, it's hanging over in the electrical section of that same exact structure with an airplane where they filled it up, it expanded, there's fuel on the floor, and the door was left open. So it can happen. So to say that it's not, the likelihood is probably slim, that's true. But the committee at the time felt strongly enough that it was a reasonable request for a code due to climatic nature. Thank you.
Well, I propose we put this to the amendment, the author of the amendment. Mr. Callion, how would you like to proceed with this one? With the existing language or modify the language as?
I like a good balance is to proceed with the existing language.
As proposed in your email this morning, that's correct?
As proposed in the email.
This is Craig Fredine. I would chime in as well. Reading this section on 305 in the IFGC, which I have available to me, the verbiage when it discusses doors is just doors. So I echo the previous statement that the code has not traditionally noted gasketed or non-gasketed, so it's okay for us to leave it as is. I guess, as this is Craig, I guess I have one more. I'm a little confused on the intent of this verbiage with open spaces less than 5,000 square feet. Can I get a little bit more context on, is this saying that the vehicle space of where a vehicle would be placed and that hazard area would be limited to 5,000 square feet and beyond that we don't care? Or is this any room that is adjacent to a vehicle park place less than 5,000 square feet, which is a big room, also then doesn't have to be limited to the 18 inches. Can I get some clarification on that, please?
That was my attempt to limit this to only open areas that are less than 5,000 square feet to be amended, because what's happening is, the way it's currently written, it ends up getting big box stores, grocery stores, large warehouses, and adjacent sales room floors end up into this amendment. So my attempt was, if this space is bigger than 5,000 square feet and they're putting that many cars in there, it should be classified as a parking garage, was how I selected that. And I'll admit it's totally arbitrary on the 5,000 square feet.
Okay. And that to me makes a lot of sense, why I understand the intent on that. Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments from the committee on this topic? Any thoughts?
Hello, Chair. This is Keith. Just to go along with it, I do see Eric and I had some conversations with this on this matter before today's meeting, just to talk about it. And I do see the point that he's making, and I do think that there is I do think that what he's proposing is a good idea.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Well, what I propose that we do moving forward with several of these, so we've noted amendments from Mr. Fredine to the plumbing code. We've noted these amendments to the IMC and the IFGC. I'll also talk about another one in just a minute. But what I propose we aim to do today is we make a motion to approve the Title 23 language as amended by these amendment modifications we're discussing. That way we can approve it, the meeting can move forward, they can include the changes we're discussing today, and they're not waiting for us to have time to meet again. Does that sound, as a group, like a way we want to move forward?
Concur.
Concur.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, before we get to the moment, the making a motion portion, I want to mention one other thing I threw in with the other amendment modification showing up this morning. It was discussed briefly at the last meeting, the definition that redefines registered design professional as a civil engineer only. I looked into that, and that was a specific amendment for Chapter 17 on special inspections, where a structural engineer would be allowed to act as the special inspector in certain cases. Due to the reorganization of the new IBC, all definitions were moved up front, so that definition became a document-wide definition, which is inappropriate. So I propose modifying the definition to clarify it only applies to Chapter 17. Wonder if anybody had a chance to look at that. Any other thoughts? Not sure about the other definitions that are in the amendments too, if there's any problems with them being applied to the full IBC. Mr. Knopfsinger, do you have any thoughts on this? I'd be interested in your input you're more familiar with some of the other definitions that are in there.
Yeah, Sterling, I totally agree with you. I saw your email and I just considered that to be more of an editorial thing, so I went ahead and made the correction. It's not in the version that was sent to you guys because I saw your email after we'd already sent it out, but I corrected the version that'll be going to legal to say civil engineer, or to reference Chapter 17, just as you proposed.
Okay. Are there any issues with some of the other definitions? Like, I know specifically there's the foundation definitions and seismic-induced ground motion, which originally only applied to Chapter 18. They will now apply to all of the IBC. Is there a potential for any problems with that?
Oh goodness, I don't think so. I think that that information is likely only considered or discussed in Chapter 18.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts on this update or these definitions from the board?
So
All right,
I'm
were there-
looking at
Go
basically
ahead.
4 amendments that we've discussed here, or is it 3?
4 counting the one we just discussed.
I kind of thought it was 4. Okay, thank you.
So, by my record, I've got the plumbing code amendment from Mr. Ferdine, and then I've got the IMC and IFGC amendments from Mr. Calley and Mr. Sobolewski, and then my amendment on the definitions. Are there any other comments that have come up that were not included in the document sent out this morning that need to be considered? All right, hearing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Does somebody have some language draft written up that they'd be willing to put out there?
I'll move that we accept the amendments as submitted to us by email today, including the Uniform Plumbing Code Amendment, the Uniform Fuel Code Amendment, the Definitions Amendment, and the IBC. And what's the other amendment? Help me out. The Fuel Gas Code and
IMC, International Mechanical Code.
what? Okay, but that's 3 codes, right?
Through the chair, I have not seen the plumbing code amendments, and they're not in my inbox.
Craig sent them to me and let me forward them on here. Oh, actually,
Sorry, Rob.
I'm also trying to get all 4 of those in, so it's. The UPC, the International Fuel and Gas Code, the IBC, and is there another code?
okay,
Or
just
2 of them in the fuel gas?
Is there the energy code?
I couldn't hear that, what?
Energy code, was that included in the list?
Energy code has not been discussed today. It is a last minute change that I'm aware of.
Oh, just to change it, sorry.
From
Right.
Keith and from Eric contains 304.3 of the IMC and 305.3 of the IFGC.
Okay, so I gotta include the IMC in that motion. Okay, that's the fourth code.
So if I may,
Amendments that we discussed. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question on Keith and Eric's proposal under the revised language. It's highlighted in yellow, so I understand the language that was revised. Is there something in, because it says here 23.110.305.3 elevation of ignition source, and that's referencing the IMC. And for the IFGC, it is 304.3, but 304.3 isn't referenced in the language. Is that already in the IFC then, that language? Keith or Eric? I mean, Keith, you're the one that brought up the inclusion of language for the IFGC. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understood what the question was. Yeah, where are we missing? Are we missing a reference? That's what I'm asking, because you're trying to. You're trying to cover what you're trying to originally do in the IMC for elevation of ignition source. You're also trying to get the same wording in the IFGC. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. So in the proposed revised text that you have highlighted in yellow, and at the beginning of this, you have the amendment is based on 23.110.305.3 elevation of ignition source, and that's only referencing the IMC. Is that correct?
Well, that's referencing the IFGC. 305.3.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Yeah, no, you're right. Sorry.
The numbers are real similar. I mean,
Never mind. No,
I had to double check it a couple of times. I was going through it just to make sure I didn't write down the wrong numbers.
I'm dyslexic too. Thank you.
All right, so for clarity, in my notes, we have a UPC comment from Mr. Ferdine, an IMC comment from Mr. Cowling, IFGC comment from Mr. Sobolewski, and then IBC comment from myself. And those are our 4 amendments to this morning's Title 23 language, which are sent out.
That's correct. The IFGC and the IMC are the same thing. It's
same issue, just 2 different references.
Yeah, it's one of those great things where they've got the same requirement in 2 different codes.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Steele. So based on that, I guess we're looking for a second to Mr. Boney's motion.
Mr. Boney, did you complete your motion?
Yes.
For the record, would you like to restate it? Or would you please restate it?
Having got it a little bit tighter here. 305.2. 305.3. Okay. To approve the minutes as issued to us this morning by email, including the proposed amendment to the Uniform Plumbing Code 423.0, International Fuel Gas Code 305.3, the International Mechanical Code 305.3, and definitions in the IBC in 202.
Correction, The IMC was 304.3.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question of the, Mr. Boney. You started it off by approving the minutes issued today.
No, not the minutes, the amendments.
So we're looking at the revised amendment with these amendments. In other words, the package with all the revisions, we're now amending that to include these discussed today.
Yes.
Thank you. I would second that motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Tana, do you have a clear understanding of what this motion is
I do.
for the record? Okay. All right. All in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. We have officially put forward the local amendments and approval for moving forward with the new building code. Excellent. I want to say thank you to everyone for all the hard work of all the way back to the committee meetings, doing the reviews, pulling together the amendments, and this final review that we've done today, as well as a big thanks to staff for all of their work supporting us and responding to all of our comments and questions. So thank you for all the hard work.
Mr. Chair,
Forward now up to 2018. Yes, sir.
has this already gone through legal?
Yes, it has.
So it's ready to go before the assembly?
Yeah, basically, as fast as legal can just kind of finalize their process, which they're probably like 98% done with, to enter it into PACE, which is kind of the process of it going to the assembly.
Will the proposal be to adopt it immediately or adopt it at such date?
The assembly makes that decision based on probably input from us in the community. I really don't see much of a problem adopting it immediately. Yeah. I guess that's really probably going to come down to what kind of public testimony there is before the assembly. There's, as you saw from the significant changes, there is some controversial stuff in there, and it's hard to say what's going to happen with that stuff. But the vast majority of the code material, I think the design industry is really ready to move on to the 2018 codes.
You've answered my question, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Bob Dole requests to be recognized.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I understand from Ross we have past precedent too for were they to pass the next day a project that was a certain percent already done in design, we would not send it back to the starting blocks. I wonder if Ross could talk about what that past policy has been.
Yes. So basically, if you're submitting a new project and the codes have changed, the past policy that's been in place for at least 2 decades is that if a design is 50% or more complete at the time the assembly adopts the new codes, then the design can remain under the old codes. And we've been pretty flexible on implementing that.
So absent a different opinion from this board, it would be my intent as the building official to follow that past precedent.
Thank you, Mr. Dole. All right. Will we move on from that item? Any report and board comments? Anybody have anything to say? forward, first of all? Hearing none, staff, is there anything you'd like to report to us?
We have 2 new hires at the, in the permit counter now.
Excellent.
Hi, this is Bob Dole.
Mr. Bill,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Hi, this is Bob Dole, the building official. On behalf of staff, I'd like to express our appreciation for you all stepping up at this and realize you've earned our gratitude for your extra time, how you're spending your lunch hour today to bring this to closure, so that as an industry we can go forward with a code that when we get looked at for our building code enforcement grading system next year, we're in the right place we need to be. We realize that this is not billable time for you all, and we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, and seeing as we are burning the lunch hour, I will look for a motion to adjourn now to close out our meeting.
Move to adjourn?
I'll second.
Who seconded?
Keith?
Thank you.
All right, we have a movement and a second, and I believe that means we're done. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to meet today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.